Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Thanks very much, Paul, and I'd like to thank the Veritas Forum for inviting me to speak at this event, I think. Also, as regards the topic question tonight, is God enough? Is science enough? My answer is no, and I think that's your answer too, right? So maybe just go get a beer or something. Well, I guess there's the other question about the meaning of life. I'd like to say a few words on that. I'd like to answer that question personally. The phrase, the meaning of life, sounds a little grandiose for me. I'd like to tell you how I personally find meaning in life. And it seems to me that that's probably the best I can do this evening. For those of you who are impatient for the ending, the four ways I find meaning in life are through science, reason, art, and love. You know, actually, I spent a lot of time last night worrying about this. I thought, have I forgotten something on that list? You know, I mean, is someone going to leap up from the audience and say, you know, you forgot about mountains and waterfalls and birds and flowers and you forgot about French bread, crusty, covered with butter and Vegemite, and you forgot about the Super Bowl. That's what gives me meaning in life. So unfortunately, all I have to talk about tonight is science, reason, art, and love. And for those of you who are impatient and just want to sort of think about something else while I'm talking, we can get that slide of the art up there, and then that'll give you something to look at while I'm talking about science and reason. So someone came up to me just before this event started and asked, "Are you the atheist?" and I said, "Yeah, I'm the atheist." But I prefer to use a different term. I prefer to use the term free thinker, a more old-fashioned term, and I'll explain a little bit what I mean by that. Okay, so first, science. How do I find meaning in science? So I'm going to go through all of these with a series of anecdotes about my life. So about a year ago, I was walking in the Campbell Wash, which is a dry riverbed near where we live, taking the dog for a walk. And I saw the most remarkable thing. It was a bright yellow line going across the pathway. I thought, gee, what's that? So I followed this line to a hole in the ground, surrounded by a pile of yellow shreds of Palo Verde flowers. And I thought, well, that's amazing. And then I looked a little bit more closely, and I saw these ants carrying these Palo Verde petals into the hole. And so that was an exciting moment for me. That was a lot of fun. I sort of looked at something, asked myself a question about it, followed it through. I found the explanation. Of course, those questions never stop, right? I could have kept going. I could have said, for example, why are they carrying these Palo Verde petals into this hole? And I could have then maybe found that out and wondered why in the life cycle of the leafcutter ant they did this. And then I could have gone back, you know, how did this species arise and so on. The questions are never ending. I could have spent my whole life asking those questions, and some scientists do. Unfortunately, the dog had gone on and was rolling in some horse manure, so I had to cut that line of speculation short. So that's my first sort of little example of how I find meaning in life through science, asking questions, observing things, and figuring stuff out. Okay, well, what about reason? Isn't that sort of just incorporated within science? Well, we know the answer to that, right? Mathematical reasoning is not the same thing as scientific reasoning. There are lots of forms of reasoning that we use to find meaning, that we use to figure things out. Okay, so now those of you who hate mathematics might really want to look at this painting. I'm just going to talk a little bit about mathematics. That won't be a test, it's all right. At least I don't think so. So when I was a kid, 6, 7 years old, I asked my mother, I was thinking about odd and even numbers. And I had noticed if you add two odd numbers, you get an even number. And I asked my mother, is that always true? Do you always get an even number when you add two odd numbers? And she said, yeah, that's true. And it's also true, odd plus even is odd, and even plus odd is odd, and even plus even is even. And I don't quite remember what I did then. I like to think that I went away and thought about it for a while. That would be better for the story I'm about to tell. So let's pretend that's what I did. It's possible that I just went outside and played. I said, oh, yeah, that's cool, okay, and went outside and played. But if you think about it, it's a beautiful thing. It's easy to think about. You might think of an even number as a number that can be divided evenly into pairs. An odd number, that is a number that can be, you divide into pairs and you have one odd man out left over. And if you add two odd numbers, the two odd men out become a pair, so the sum is divided into pairs. We just proved a little theorem there. It was okay, right? It didn't hurt. And so that to me is just the most exciting thing. You can just think about stuff in your head. Like if you want to answer a mathematical question, you don't have to go and look at an ant nest to get the answer. You just think about it and you can figure it out. So I always thought that was really exciting. And that's what we love about mathematics. But mathematics, by the way, is not the only domain of reasoning. I mean, I think there's moral reasoning. Maybe if we have time later, we can talk a little bit more about that. Moral reasoning is when you try and figure out what the right thing to do is. And that's another form of reasoning. So when I say reasoning, I'm not limiting it to logic. All right, so that's the second way I find meaning in life, through reason. Okay, what about art? All right, so this is art. Let's go back to the other one for a while. Okay, this is a painting. This is another story from my life. This really is what this evening is about, stories from my life. This was a painting called Blue Poles by the American artist Jackson Pollock, who's one of these action spill the paint on the canvas artists. It was bought by the Australian government in 1973. I was a kid. I grew up in Australia, in case you were wondering. The Australian government paid $2 million for this painting. It's like, $2 million. It was, at that time, was a shocking price to pay, and so it was a very controversial purchase. And, I went and looked at this painting, and it was in the National Gallery in Sydney before it went down to Canberra, and people came trooping in, looked at it. People came up to it and said, oh, I could have done better than that. Give me $2 million. But I found this painting utterly fascinating. I stood there for an hour just staring at it, watching it. Now, unlike with science and mathematics, where I have the words to explain to you how I find meaning, what is the meaning I find, I can't quite describe to you what I see in this painting. I can tell you how much it pleases me to look at it. I mean, these blue poles, the big vertical stripes, the way they sort of lean at seemingly random angles, but then you think maybe it's not so random, and this orange sort of pathway going all the way through in this sort of white fuzz. But, as you can tell, my wife's an art historian, but I'm not. I don't really have the words to describe the meaning that I find. And all I know is that it does have meaning for me, that I could spend hours looking at this painting and somehow getting lost in it. So that's a very different sort of meaning. That's more the sort of just meaning that you find when you're listening, and I should have used a musical example since we're in Crowder Hall, but like the music, when you're listening to a late Beethoven quartet, or the meaning you find in a poem that you don't quite understand. Anyway, that's my third way of finding meaning in life, art. So fourth, what was the fourth one? Oh, love, right. Yeah, I sort of feel weird now. I'm not sure this was a great decision, talking about love in front of 300 or 400 people. By love, by the way, I'm not just talking about romantic love. I'm talking about love of family, the love you feel for your fellow human beings when you're in a good mood. So I'm going to approach this one somewhat obliquely, and you might think, what does this have to do with love? I'm going to tell you about my family. I have a wife and 3 daughters, whom I love unconditionally, and we have, they're grown now, they're all going to the University of Arizona, either in graduate school or undergraduate, and we have family dinners which to me is somehow are more important than science, than reason, or than art. And those family dinners are events where we talk a lot. We talk a lot about things. My eldest daughter, I learned about post-structuralism the other day. I won't talk about that. My middle daughter was telling me about gene sequencing, and my youngest daughter was telling me about the wonderful poetry that she's studying. And so we have these very, very lively discussions. And one day, a few years ago, 10 years ago, when my youngest daughter was 10 years old, I threw out the question at the dinner table, why is it wrong to kill people? Just to get a conversation going, you know? And I tell you, this really scares the boyfriends. Anyway, my youngest daughter, Sally, thought about it for a while, and she said, well, it's wrong to kill people because they have plans for the future. And then she paused for a few seconds, and she said, besides, there are people that love them. And I thought, wow, she just summarized 2,000 years of philosophy in 2 sentences around the McCallum family dinner table. That's pretty good. So what's the point of this anecdote? I think that love, as I said, means love of your fellow human beings. It certainly means love of family. And certainly the question we were discussing, morality, I want to go back to this point I was making earlier about moral reasoning, that it is something you can reason about. And I think it somehow is related to that love of your fellow human beings. Okay, so that's my 4 stories. You're probably wondering at this stage, when is he going to start talking about God? Of course, I don't start talking about God. I mean, doesn't enter into my reasoning or my way of looking at things. It doesn't enter into the way I find meaning in life. I think I've sort of explained that. But I listen to other people, and I have an impression of how people think about God. And often I think when you take these 4 domains, God is somehow the sort of the punctuation point to stop you from just sort of going ever backwards in your questioning. God is the ultimate cause. God is immanent in everything we look at. God is love. God is the source of moral righteousness. And somehow, I think that's sort of the way it works, all these 4 areas, that God provides a sort of punctuation point. And to me, as a free thinker, that also tends to mean a limit on how far you may go in your thinking, a limit on the questions you may ask. And I don't think I'm being paranoid here, because I think there was a time in history when free thinkers really were, thrown in jail or worse. Of course, that doesn't happen now, but still, I think there's some essential antipathy between free thinking and religion, which stops me. In other words, God, or naming something as God, using that label on some certain area of knowledge, is in a way saying, you may not go further, you may not ask questions anymore, or if you do ask questions, we'll just tell you it's a mystery. And so in some sense, it provides a boundary or a limit to free thinking. And, this is the problem I have with creationism, not that I'm suggesting anyone here is a creationist, but it's not so much that the answer that they give to the complexity of life, explaining the complexity of life, is wrong or a bad answer, is that it's not an answer. It just sort of shoves all that complexity further back to some remote and unreachable intelligent designer, and then if I want to ask the question, well, how did that intelligent designer come to be so complex, that's sort of not a question that you're going to get anywhere with. So, and certainly, in a way, I guess I would say religious answers to questions for me sound a little bit like the answers your parents give you when they're sick of all your questions, and they say, well, that's just the way it is. That's because I said so. And that sort of impedes what I see as a natural human impulse to ask questions, to love beauty, to believe in right, to experience wonder. I think all of those things are natural human impulses. It's not surprising that there are also elements of the many religions of the world, because, at least in my view, those religions are human creations. And indeed, organized religion sometimes lays claim to these impulses in a way that I find irksome, and saying, in fact, the only source of wonder, the only source of truth is is from my religion. And that's where I start, as I say, to feel irked by religion. Well, okay, I mean, I don't want to end on a sour note. So let me spend the last few minutes talking about death. If life has meaning, then does that meaning continue after death? Is there meaning to the life of someone who has died? So I want to tell you about a man named Alan who was someone I only really knew for the last few years of his life. He died a couple of years ago. He suffered from ALS, which is a disease that robs you of your motor control. But it never robbed him of his mind. It never robbed him of his freedom of thought. And Alan and his wife Deborah used to come and stay in our guest house every spring to help Alan escape the rigors of the Massachusetts winter. He lived just right near you. And so I got to know him. And Alan was a wonderful person. He was warm and he was witty. He was incredibly smart and very articulate. And to the very end, as his voice got fainter and fainter from ALS, you could still feel that intelligence shining through. Deborah, who's in town, we were having dinner with her last night, and she reminded me of a wonderful story about Alan. So they were at a dinner party, and Alan was asked, oh yeah, one of the things I should tell you is that among his many jobs in his life, including building houses, he taught philosophy at college for a few years. And so people knew that he knew about philosophy, and someone at this dinner party said, give me a one-sentence summary of existentialism. So Alan thought about it for a while and came up with the following. He said, man is alone in the universe and is responsible for his actions without recourse to higher authority. Pretty good one-sentence summary of existentialism. Now, Deborah, when they got home, Deborah said, well, that was a bit bleak, wasn't it? Like, couldn't you have said something else? And he said, well, I was only allowed one sentence. If I'd been allowed a second sentence, I would have said something about art and something about love. Alan's life was full of art and love, full of beauty and happiness, and it still has meaning. He was the quintessence of a free thinker. He knew, as he moved towards death, he believed, as I believed, that he was moving towards nothingness. But he carried that voyage with such beauty and grace that he still lives on. In the only way that I believe anybody lives on after death, he lives on in the memories of those who loved him. Thank you.
Thank you, my friends. Thanks to all the organizations putting this show together. I'm excited to be here. Never been to Arizona before, and I'm thrilled. I see some of my old students who I saw at Ohio State, even at Williams from last summer here, and Sister Joy. It's even an honor for me to share the stage with these two gentlemen. This summer, actually, in January, I was at a conference in Boston where I actually saw Bill McCallum win this amazing distinguished award. So it's great to actually meet him in person today and get to spend time with him. So today, we're here to struggle, exactly as Bill was saying, with big ideas. And, this is what college is about. It's not about worrying about math and engineering and sciences and literature, but it's a chance in your life to think about these big questions, which you might never get a chance to think about again when you're in the middle of a career, middle of a families, and all the other things you have to do. Things like, what is truth? What is reality? What is the purpose of existence? Is there a God? How do we know? And things like, why are Ugg boots so popular? I don't understand. And so we ask, is science enough? That's the question we've been asked to think about. We're in 21st century America, and science is intensely valued. It is absolutely valued, extremely. It's embedded in our culture. In the airplane ride on the way here, whether I'm standing on the line in Starbucks for a cup of coffee, people say things like, oh, you're a scientist, or you're a mathematician. Wow, you must be smart. You might have heard these things if you're studying for a doctorate or a master's, even an undergrad for a math or a science degree. Oh, wow, you must be smart. Why isn't it that people don't say, wow, you're an artist, you must be smart, or you're a plumber, you must be smart. Somehow the scientists get this claim that the values embedded in our culture, that science is more valuable, more important, more academically superior than the rest. And science is, to me, far more important as a mathematician because I'm blinded by what I love. But how do we get this way? How do we get to the point where society values certain things far more importantly, especially in 21st century America, than other ones? So I claim that part of it has to do with the Enlightenment era, which is this beautiful era. Let me tell you something about the Enlightenment era, but before I do, I want to tell you about the Renaissance. I'm sure you've heard of that word, the Renaissance era, the rebirth. It's where art and music and science and literature and math were all blended together, where faith and reason and beauty were all interconnected. Paintings and poems and cathedrals, what Professor McCallum was talking about, what he got excited about. The time of the Renaissance celebrated these things. And following this era was the time of the Enlightenment, around the 1750s. And here reason was advocated as the primary source of authority. Right? So this Enlightenment era followed after the Renaissance. Ideas now must be tested, measured, evaluated. You just can't accept an idea because somebody says so. If somebody says the sun is the center of our solar system, well, prove it, show it, convince me. This is what the Enlightenment pushed us to do. My friends, I'm a huge fan of this era. It has given us a great understanding of this world. It's given us airplanes, great amount of technology. It's given us vaccines. It's given us triple stuffed Oreos. And this is why we have those great transportations, to take us to the hospital, to be treated after we eat this. But it's also given mathematicians especially, I'm sure Professor McCallum would agree, something that we value so importantly, probably something that we value more importantly than anything else, is that we have jobs. This is what the Enlightenment era has given us. Now, unfortunately, I think that the notion of this concept of enlightenment today has been pushed to a breaking point of something it can't handle. Let me tell you what I think it has given us today. It's given us dualism. So to share with you what this is, let me just put up this little chart here. So here we have, in the Renaissance era, there's math and art, right? They would blend in together. There's faith and there's reason, and they would go together. There's religion and politics, supernatural and natural. Let me just talk about religion and politics for a second, right? What do I mean by this? You see, religion is your answers to the big questions. We all have our own answers to what they are, what we believe, what we agree or disagree with. We have a reasoning as to why something works in a big setting. And politics is how we answer the day-to-day stuff. Like, who should get what kind of taxes should we impose? Of course, our answers to the big questions should impact our day-to-day stuff. The way you think about how individuals should be valued or communities should be valued is going to impact the way you think about divorce laws. Whether you think an individual is highly valued means anybody can get a divorce anytime. It's the individual that's important. Whether you think the community should be valued means, dude, tough it up with your marriage because it's the sake of your kids and the community. So the way you answer the big questions about religion is going to impact politics. And the Renaissance blended this together. Now, of course, today we don't have this anymore. But because of the Enlightenment, we have one not or another one, but we have one versus another one. You must pick sides. You could be the artist who is kind and loving and sensitive and is open to feelings, or you could be the cold-hearted mathematician, cruel and evil in all your thoughts. Pick your side. Right? This is what dualism has done. You know that the person who's against Superman is Lex Luthor. You know the person who's against Batman is Joker. And you know the person against the art major is the math major. We know this, right? These are the ones that aren't supposed to fit anymore. Well, my friends, this is even applied to math, my own field of math. Let me show you something this is one of the most coolest things I've ever seen here. This is the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. This is applying for surfaces. Every math talk must have some equation thrown in there, so let me tell you what this is if you don't know. I'm actually getting kind of emotionally moved by looking at this theorem here. This says that the integral, integral just means add up. If you add up the amount of curviness of your surface, at every point of your surface is an amount of curviness. If you add up the total amount of curviness, the curvature of your surface, you're going to get 2 pi times the Euler characteristic of the surface. All that you need to know is the right side is some constant. So if you have a sphere, the number is going to be 4 pi. No matter how much I take the sphere and stretch it and pull it and deform it, the total amount of curviness the sphere will ever have is 4 pi. It's such a gorgeous result. But when most of us see this, we agree with what Stephen Colbert says when he says equations are the devil's sentences. You see this dualism I'm talking about? One of the most beautiful visual results in mathematics. It's embodied in a formula, and most of us are getting nauseous when we look at it. You see, when we think of math, this fact that art is the opposite end of the spectrum, this is sort of the norm, even in my own field. Let me show you this other picture here, right? Here we have 4 different versions of shadows of 4-dimensional objects pushed into 3 dimensions. Right, so all 4 of these things, they're hand-drawn. I drew them. This is part of my research. And they're 4-dimensional objects that you can actually hold in your hand. And there is a proof that all 4 of them are the same. Right? They look different, but they're actually the same things from different perspectives. And the proof is this. That's the proof. There's nothing else. The picture is the proof. You don't need an equation. And most of you are going, well, convince me. Well, that's just because you suck. Right? You're not able. You see, you're not trained in the visual arts to actually see that they're equivalent, but that doesn't mean that's not enough. You see, somebody needs integrations and somebody needs algebras, but art is valuable. Visual display is important. You see, the Enlightenment model, this concept of math and art has been pushed even to where we live today. I think science is a beautiful thing. I'm a scientist, I'm a mathematician, but when you say that science is going to solve all the problems of the world, that in some sense knowledge is going to be more important than anything else. That's the key to unlocking the issues we have today. I think we're going on dangerous grounds. You see, some say that religion is somehow a scaffolding. You need it to make sense of the world for a little bit, but it's just going to hold things together till we figure out what's really going on by science, and then you can dismantle that stuff. That's not needed, really. Some scientists would say, you know what? The reason we don't understand things like pain and suffering and faith is because we don't really understand biology yet. We don't really understand chemistry or psychology. See, when we really figure out the mind, when we understand what genetics is about, when we know what chemicals are doing to us, then we will really see that your faith is really a chemical compound pumping into your system to make sense. But to me, I have seen with my eyes the evidence that I've seen in this past century of ideas, as knowledge gets pushed up, as I see 2 world wars in this past century. I see genocide, I see torture. The more knowledge we have, the world has had more knowledge now than ever before. And I don't see our problems getting easier. I don't see our problems dissolving. I don't see knowledge as solving the answers. It feels like we're holding on to a model as if science is going to solve everything, and this model is not working. The Enlightenment model that we had is not enough for the world of today. Let me give you a quote by Stephen Hawking. This is from his book, The Grand Design. It's a beautifully written book. And here's what Stephen Hawking writes in this book. Let's see if I can click this. He writes, when a model is found lacking, and here Stephen Hawking is writing about, string theory versus the classic physics model. And he's saying we should think about string theory deeper because the physics model isn't enough to hold these cool ideas. But I think it's more than that. He writes, when a model is found lacking, a common reaction is to say the experiment was wrong. If that doesn't prove to be the case, people still often don't abandon the model, but instead attempt to save it through modifications. I think we're looking at this Enlightenment model and we're holding on to this idea rather than thinking of something bigger that can encompass bigger things. This is why I don't think science alone is enough. You see, when I see the world today, I see that there are these 2 notions of meaning in this world, when people are looking for meaning in this world. There's this Western viewpoint, right? This Western viewpoint has an escapism tendency. Let me tell you what I mean by this. From the religious perspective, there's a sense of escapism, literally that the world of the flesh is evil and the world of the spirit is good. In this Western notion of religion, people would say, get out of this world, literally because the world is going to hell. Get out, physically escape this world. Heaven is what all that matters. There's an academic sense of this escapism notion. Bertrand Russell, one of this amazing philosopher and mathematician, he writes this. He writes, remote from human passions, he's talking about mathematics, remote even from the pitiful facts of nature, the generations have gradually created an ordered cosmos where pure thought can dwell in its natural home, where one at least of our nobler impulses can escape from the dreary exile of the actual world. Bertrand Russell is saying, look, the ideas are what matters. Reason, math, this is the true glory. This junk around you, let's get out of here. That's just gone. Don't worry about that stuff. This is an extreme case of dualism. Now, there's a Western perspective, and the Western perspective has not a sense of escapism, but a sense of acceptance. The good and the bad must exist. The Jedi and the Sith must hang out. Right? Just accept it, man. The Dark Lord is coming. Tough it up. Or, from a different perspective, you could say there are numerous paths to God. Everybody's right. In fact, all paths are to God. There's nothing called absolute truth with a capital T. There's nothing called absolute reality with a capital R. But my friends, I don't see meaning in either of these extremes. You see, I don't want to accept the world because I think there's too much injustice in the world. I just don't want to accept it for what it is. But I don't want to escape the world because there's too much beauty in this world. I don't want to give it up. It's so sexy. So how do we do this thing? I believe that the natural and the supernatural should fit together. Now, I'm not asking we go back to the time of the Renaissance. I think the Enlightenment was wonderful and is wonderful, but we need a new model that encapsulates these things. So here's one thing that to me, in a concrete way, I hold on to, and this is my Christian faith. So let me tell you why I, as a mathematician who's been trained in logic, finds this faith attractive. Now, I'm not talking about faith in general. I'm not into spirituality for the sake of spirituality. I'm talking about the Christian faith as a particular thing that I find beautiful. So let me just close by telling you why. A few things. First, I think it is not ultimate truth given to us in an abstract setting, God giving us golden tablets of stone saying that is truth, but it is truth given to us in history. You see, I believe in the Christian faith that the Bible is a record of God's interactions with fools like me. The God of the universe personally interacting in history, and it's recorded in the historical thing. It's something you can measure. Now, you can't measure it scientifically, but you can at least study it historically. There's some litmus test that you can use to actually understand this thing. And the climax of the Christian faith is the birth, the death, and the historical resurrection of Christ. Now, if Jesus didn't historically resurrect, this is a junk religion. But if he did resurrect, we have to take it seriously. So can we use historical tools to think about this thing? And as a scientist, that I find attractive. The second thing I find attractive is how the truth is revealed. It does not require us to give blind allegiance to a God of absolute power, but it is the God of the universe who actually gives up his absolute power, bends his knee, and gives it up for us on the cross. I find this so attractive. The heart of the Christian faith, there's a God who died for his enemies, who prayed for their forgiveness. And the goal of a Christian is to imitate this God. That I find truly attractive. And the third and the final reason I find the Christian faith fantastic is it, to me, provides a way of restoring this world. Not getting out of here, but actually fixing it. Not accepting what it is and just putting up with the injustice, not escaping it, hoping that one day I'm going to die and float in happiness, but that one day God will set the world right, and it starts today with us. The Christian life, to me, is not compensation for a good life. Somehow I did good and I get this reward, but it's a restoration of a good life. Pain and injustice is actually given a solution here. So my friends, here's what I ask of you. Think deeply during your college years of deep issues, no matter how painful they are. Do not compartmentalize your life into pieces. Let me close with one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite places, The Princess Bride. Life is pain. Anyone that says otherwise is selling something. When I'm here to talk to you about bringing in a new paradigm of thinking about the Enlightenment and the world today, about bringing faith and reason together, there's no easy answer. There's no magic equation. There's no box to check that's going to make it. But struggle with it. These are worthy of your struggle and your time. Thank you.
Well, what I'd like to do just for a few minutes here, have asked the speakers, the presenters, to ask each other a question that they have thought about while the other one is making their presentation. So we'll start with Dr. McCallum. Do you have a question based on Satyen's comments that you would like to ask him and have him respond to you?
Well, I'd like to know more about that theorem.
Oh. Yeah,
I got another question for you.
I was getting excited for a little bit.
So you said you find the Christian religion attractive. And I can remember a time in life when I felt the same way. I grew up in a country where, I was in a public school, but we had a Methodist minister come by and sing us songs and tell us Bible stories. And I thought, this is fun. This is nice. I like these stories. I like these songs. He plays the button accordion pretty well. And so I remember once I was walking down the stairs after one of these classes, and I asked one of my classmates, I said, "Do you believe in God?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "How do you do it?" And so attractiveness doesn't cut it for me. So how do you do it?
That's a great question. So to be fully honest, as anybody should be, they struggle, right? So I cannot imagine a particular time that I would say if they experience this particular moment, they would immediately be a Christian as well. So it's a struggle in terms of understanding, in terms of reading. And for example, if the Bible really was a set of truths historically that was given to us by God, then it should be a beautiful literary document. And so I try to read it as such, and it is. It's truly beautiful. So it's small pieces of evidence that are built up. And I think, to me, it's sort of three pieces. One, it has been a personal walk. My life has changed in small ways that I can say, yes, there's something real about this thing. Two, it's a communal walk, that if I'm the only person believing this thing, then that would put up red flags in my mind, right? So it's personal, it's communal, but if those things are the only two things, that's again dangerous. There must be reason. So I think the part that I find attractive that I want to talk about today was the reason part. So I think the three of them push me in the right way.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll turn the table, so to speak, and Satyan, can you ask a question of Dr. McCallum with regard to his presentation?
Great. So Bill, one of the things that attracted me, as I just said, was about injustice and justice, and sort of there is, as you mentioned, there's nobody above you. We are, in terms of existentialism and things like this, and the fact that I find that there's a God that is good above me. I have a sense of letting my guard down when it comes to, in a good way, when it comes to justice. If somebody cuts me off on the road, as a small example, we all know we want to follow that person right there, don't we? How dare you cut me off, right? So, but even in an extreme case, like some harm being done to your family, to your daughters, or even an extreme like genocide, what are your thoughts about sort of injustice and working with resolving those issues?
Well, I think injustice is bad. I'm opposed to it as well. And this sort of bears on the question of moral reasoning that I sort of alluded to briefly in my remarks. So my feeling about moral reasoning is that it's actually not that hard most of the time to figure out what's right and what's wrong. I mean, people struggle and act as if it's a big deal. Most of the time, and of course every now and then you'll have some really complex moral dilemma, right, that you can't figure out. Mostly in day-to-day life, it's not hard to decide what's right or wrong. What's really hard is doing what's right or what's wrong, because most of the time your moral reasoning leads you to a conclusion that you should do something that you don't really want to do, like not chase after the guy, right? So my feeling about religion is that it doesn't particularly help one way or the other in that regard. There are people who do the right thing because religion gives them the strength to do the right thing, right? But equally, there are people who do the wrong thing because they can find a religious justification to it. And I'm happy to call it a wash, you know? All right.
So I just had...
That was the other atheist. But so... So I guess what I would say, I just want to finish up that thought a little bit. There's nothing like not having a God for making you take responsibility for your actions yourself. It focuses your mind, okay, it's basically up to me, and it's not going to happen. So I find strength from realizing that it's my responsibility to do the right thing.
So can I clarify one thing?
Sure.
So I don't mean that's perfect. I agree with you. I don't mean your personal struggles. I just mean, what do you think about the injustice that happens? In other words, will it ever be set right? Will somebody judge those who have done wrong and gotten away with it? That's what I was trying to get at. I agree with you that somebody could be a good person,
right?
Without religion.
I don't know. Okay. I don't know what the future holds. Of course, in my belief system, they will eventually just die. Okay. And that'll be the end of it for them.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think in the spirit of keeping on our time, I'm not going to ask the question from the Veritas Planning Committee. They can all get mad at me afterwards for not asking this question. But I'd like to go now, if we can, if the ushers are ready with the microphones. I would like to begin the process of getting questions from the audience. Now, what we're going to ask you to do is to raise your hand if you have a question, and we'll get a microphone to you. Tell us your name, and if you're a student at the university, please tell us your major. And if you're not a student, just tell us you're a visitor. And we'll rotate from left to right, my left to right, and then we will take text questions that are being sent in to our group. So we'll be doing this for the next 25 minutes. So settle in, and please, if you have a question, be ready to raise your hand, and we'll get a microphone to you. So let's take the first question here, please. And if it's for both speakers, tell us. And if it's just for one of them, tell us that too, please.
Hello, my name is Steve. I want to thank you, gentlemen, for coming out. It's been very enjoyable. This question, I'd like Dr. McCallum to start out answering it, but I'd also like to hear from Devadoss. You assert that religion is a human invention. Is mathematics a human invention? And then if you could perhaps elaborate on where you think it comes from and why you think mathematics just works and has such amazing predictive ability, et cetera, et cetera. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I probably did say human invention, although I think it would be more accurate to say it's a human phenomenon. I mean, as regards religion, I mean, invention is sort of a weird thing to say about something that's been around for so long. But, yeah, but on the question of mathematics, that's a great question. You know, of course, there are lots of people who think that mathematics is some sort of pre-existing truth that we're discovering, and then there are people who think that it's somehow constructed by human beings. There's been a lot of interesting books on that recently. And I'm going to give you, I'm probably just going to call this a cop-out. I'm going to give you a sort of pragmatic answer, which is that I don't believe you can actually do mathematics without believing in its reality. That is to say, if you're going to spend, you know what it's like trying to prove a theorem, like 95% of the time you feel like a complete idiot, and the other 5% of the time you think that everything's obvious, and then the remaining time you think you might have done something useful, right? I mean, you have to wait a little bit when you're not dealing with math audience, you know? So I have to believe in its external reality. I have to believe it's something real that I'm discovering as a practical matter. Otherwise, I can't do my job. I'll leave the rest to the philosophers or the poets.
So to me, I would say, again, in all honesty, it doesn't matter. I mean, it doesn't matter whether I can say, yes, you know, this mathematics is a language that studies structure, and we're putting structure on the framework of the world. We're putting structure on numbers or abstract systems, whether it really exists or not, like the imaginary numbers. You can say it's measuring structure in a lot of ways, and it's beautiful. And you can say, yeah, this is structure that God has created and we're discovering, or it's structure that's independent. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me, right? I mean, I'm looking at it from a certain perspective as a believer, but when I do math, I love math for what it is. So it's a good question.
Very good question. Question over here, please.
I'm Aiden. You asked us to introduce ourselves. I'm an education major at the U of A. Dr. McCallum, this is for you. If the second law of thermodynamics is true, and everything is heading towards disorder, towards a lack of usable energy, then everything must be heading towards what you call nothingness, heading towards death. If that's the case, if everything is going to die, then how can we maintain the hopeful attitude towards death that you seem to advocate as a free thinker?
You know, I'm by nature an optimist. I enjoy life. I think it's funny and fun. And I care about doing the right thing. I like doing math. I love my family. All of those things, you're not finding a satisfactory answer to this question. I mean, one thing I would say is that this nothingness is a very long way in the future. And so it's hard to sort of take it that seriously. And I guess the other thing I would say is there were a lot of ifs there. We actually don't really know. You know, science, as I said before, is only part of the way I view things. And I think a true scientist is basically not going to be able to make that doom sort of scenario that you described a certainty. They're just going to say, yeah, according to the current cosmological theories, that's the way the universe is going to go. There are mysteries at the beginning and at the end of the universe. And I think everybody wonders about what happened just before the Big Bang, for example. I mean, I'll just go back to your original question, you know, how can I maintain such optimism in the face of the eventual heat death of the universe? And I'll just say, I don't know, somehow I managed to do it.
Okay, do we have a text question, please, DJ?
Yes, we do. Yeah, this one's from online, and the question will be behind for you. It's for Dr. Devadoss. Wouldn't you admit that faith is unquestioning belief, while reason is internal debate? How then can you expect the ideas to be married gracefully?
I wouldn't say that faith is, I guess I disagree with that thing. I wouldn't say faith is unquestioning belief. For example, somebody could say that if you walk out those doors, that there's room, rather than an empty pit of death. I know there was a room when I came in, but now they could say there's an empty pit, and I'd say, you know, I have faith that there is a room out there because of the reason and the experience that I've gone through it, because of the historical context that when I came here about an hour ago, that there was a room. And so I don't think faith has anything to do with blind allegiance to anything, but I think faith is something that you can't necessarily prove. Right? So right now, I cannot prove that there is an empty pit of death or a room out there, but I have faith that there is because of the experiences, historical context, and the things I've gone through. So I think they can be married. In other words, faith can go with reason, but reason cannot prove faith. Right? And one, it cannot be possibly based exactly on the other one, and thus there's no mathematical equation to prove, you know, religion exists or God exists. That's why there is faith, but that doesn't mean it has to be alone.
Very good, very good. Great question. Let's go down here to this side. Can we bring the microphone down to, got a couple of hands down here on this side. And remember, please give us your name and your major and your question.
Oh, okay, you're holding it. I'm Gabriel. I am a philosophy major, freshman, second semester. Professor, is that sufficient? Professor Devadoss, correct me if I'm wrong, but you seem to say that like reason and like the Enlightenment has led to like more suffering and hurt and all these things today. I mean, it's like, you know, the Crusades were, you know, religious. You know, like if you look 200 years ago, they were hanging 12-year-olds in England. You know, slavery was justified. I mean, it seems like, although there is a lot of injustice in the world, like at least in my arrogant Western society opinion, you know, we've got some society going where we're trying to promote justice and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, no, let me be really clear. I completely agree with you, right? So I will never say that we need less reason, right? Nor will I ever say we need less science. Nor will I ever say that math should be funded less, right? So what I want to say was the framework in which we look through the world should be more than reason alone. That was my point, right? So you're right. Of course, there has been atrocities in the name of religion, absolutely. And in the name of Christ, absolutely. Those are things that the Christian faith, if one is claiming to be a Christian, must take seriously and must sit down and face those facts. Absolutely true. But I'm just saying, if one argues that because of science alone that the world is going to get better, I don't see that, right? That's all I was trying to say. We have more atrocities in this past century, more intense wars than we have had before too. So we should really take that into consideration and think beyond just the box of science. Thank you.
Very good. Next question over here on the left.
My name is Roni Grad, and many years ago I was a history major. Now I'm faculty in pediatrics here at the U of A. And I have a question for Dr. McCallum. You made a comment about the God concept kind of limiting free thinking. And, you know, when I look back at history, and I'll also say I'm coming from a Lutheran background, so I just want to, for interest of full disclosure. But when I look back at history, I look at the time of the Reformation, which was, for me, a rediscovery of the pure gospel. I look back at the Reformation as a time that actually liberated people to become even more free thinkers than they were before. So really our faith really started people on the lines of inquiry and the thought processes that led to the Enlightenment, that led furthered the Renaissance, that led to some of the issues brought up in the Enlightenment, that started people asking the scientific questions and the like. So I just wanted to hear your comments a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to suggest that religion is always bad. I think lots of people do lots of good things, and lots of people do lots of bad things, and sometimes they do them in the name of the religion, and sometimes they don't. I tend, in my worldview, to blame the people, not the religion, because those are the people who do the bad things. So I think you've described a moment in history where a religious movement did provide some liberation from, I might add, another religious movement. But I take your point. And when I was talking about religion being limiting, I don't think I was talking about, at least not in modern times, about sort of like direct, brutal, you may not think this. I was simply talking about, from a personal point of view, my own intellectual explorations of where I get meaning from. And I guess I am a firm believer in that freedom to think whatever you want, freedom to ask whatever questions you want. And it was that sort of freedom that I was putting in opposition to religious answers to questions. Now, to be fair to religion, I think religion's been pushed back quite a lot in the 20th century by science. I mean, I think that's maybe partly your point. And so those boundaries are sort of a long way away. And I'm not interested in fighting that fight particularly. But I still believe that eventually a religious answer to a question is in some sense an answer which is saying, no, there's a mystery here, you have to take this on faith, we can't talk anymore. And it was in that sense that I say that free thinking and religion are in some sense essentially in opposition to each other.
Good question. DJ, you have another one from text message.
Yes, I do, and this one is coming in several forms for both speakers, so I'll put it up there for both of you to answer. Where does the standard with which you judge moral issues come from?
So that's a great question. This is a highly non-trivial question by far. To me, definitely part of it is, or a huge part of it is the Bible, the scriptures, where I think this is the way God has wanted us to behave. Now, let me put a caveat to this thing, right? First of all, it's very dangerous to say that absolute truth is coming from this book and anybody can read it any way they want and say whatever they want to. So, of course, you have to read it historically, and this is why I find the faith attractive. It was written to a particular audience at a particular time, and yet there are truths for us to understand. That's part one. The second thing I want to know is the fact that the Bible annoys me in a lot of ways. And what it asks me to do is not what I want to do in a lot of ways. And this actually makes me happy. The fact that if I am in agreement with the book of God in everything, must either tell me God is exactly like me, which is a really creepy thought. Right? You don't want that, right? Or that I must change. And the fact that it goes against me in some situations where I think that this is probably right in this culture. I grew up in South India. I came to the U.S. I'm now in the 21st century, and there are things I don't understand and don't click with and agree with. And to me, that's saying that I need to think deeper about this thing. I'm actually comfortable being uncomfortable, that there is truth that's beyond me, that I am not the one who is straight, but I'm probably the one who's bent. So to me, the moral issues, a lot of it is coming from Scripture and the way it's been interpreted through the church.
Very good. Bill?
So it is a difficult question. It's one that philosophers have argued about for centuries. And I don't have available to me the religious answer. I also would say that for me that's not an answer anyway, because if you're going to tell me that your moral laws come from God, you know what my next question is going to be. Where did God get those moral laws? Why does he think we should behave this way? So in the end, it's not an answer for me. It's what I was talking about before, about sweeping things under the rug. It's an answer that sounds like an answer, but it's more like the parents saying, because I said so. And so from my way of looking at things, you just have to really get down and see if you can sort of derive this for yourself without recourse to a higher authority. And I think you can. Now, I haven't studied philosophy. Our philosophy major over here could probably give a much more coherent answer than I'm going to give right now. But I would say I would start from a few, I think, universally accepted and easy to recognize principles. And philosophers have sort of figured this out. It's wrong to kill people. I'll go even a little bit further than that. It's wrong to cause them pain. And you can sort of start working from there and try and figure out your ethical principles. On the one hand, as a philosophical question, we're not going to turn this into a seminar on philosophy. It's actually pretty hard work to do that. On the other hand, as I said before, I don't believe it's that difficult. I believe that most of the day-to-day moral decisions you have to face in your lives, most people in this room would recognize the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. And that gives me hope.
Very good. Okay, over here on this side of the room, we got a question up there.
I'm Kevin. I'm a pre-business student. This is for Dr. Devadoss. As a scientist trained in thinking reasonably and logically, how do you bring yourself to believe that what we know to be true natural laws and such were suspended when it came to Jesus' miracles and his resurrection and his virgin birth?
So the question is, for somebody who's been trained as a scientist, think logically. What do I think of things like miracles, Jesus' resurrection, things like this?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay. So the belief to me is that God is acting in history. God who created the universe is actually coming down in history and is acting within history. So when that happens, when God does that, there are things beyond just the natural laws that make sense, because God himself is interacting there, right? So I believe that we are people who are not just natural people, we're also supernatural people, all of us. That if we just look at the natural side of us, that to me is not enough to answer the big questions. That to me is not enough to satisfy the things in me. That's why I'm attracted to this faith. And so I don't find it difficult at all to believe that when God interacts with his creation, amazing things happen. Things that aren't meant to happen would happen. Things that we wouldn't expect to happen would happen.
Thank you for that question. Do we have a question over here on the left? I think we have one right down. You have one? Oh, yeah. Okay, great.
Hello, I'm Dale. I'm majoring in optical engineering and music composition. I'll thank Dr. McCallum very quickly for your lecture notes for Math 454. They were very helpful. Even though I had a different professor, as a wealth of information, it's very useful. My question is for Dr. Devadoss. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I'm not quite certain if I'm just misinterpreting the basis of your argument, which to me is necessarily a textbook argument from ignorance, from basic science. Generally, your notion when saying that you purport Christianity, or I guess if it would be to theism in general, would be an argument to popularity, because you said that it reinforces when a lot of people believe it to help give you a veracity as well. A preferential-based argument, and then also just a myriad of logical fallacies, which I'm not exactly getting at. So I'm just wondering, in a syllogistic sense, why is it that you denigrate science to say that make the claim that it cannot answer questions about where religion were necessarily be necessary, and can you actually prove what you're saying rather than just making this is my preference, because claims of preference do not equate to claims of truth.
So, all right.
A lot of questions there.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, maybe it is ignorance, my friend. I mean, I would love to learn. Maybe it is ignorance. I'd love to talk to you. But I would never denigrate science. Again, I want to make the point that I am a scientist. I love it. I mean, I love the Gauss-Bonnet theorem. I would never want to denigrate that. I think it's beautiful. I just think science isn't enough. That's to me is it. When I see the world around me, when as even Professor McCallum is saying, like, he has an answer to why things are working, and sometimes he doesn't. He goes, how does he get joy out of knowing that life is going to end in death, that not everybody who has done injustice is going to be fully get their just rewards. Everybody's going to die, whether it's the good or the bad. And he goes, there are no big...
I don't actually get joy.
Oh, no, sorry. Sorry. Yeah. But you're able to have a joyful face towards life, knowing that these things are there. And if you really push him for that thing, he would say, I don't know. I mean, it's... Right? So at the end of the day, it's what makes me click. I think that's why I love this dialogue, is you're just seeing us raw in some sense, right? There's not meta arguments we have. But to me, the reason I am attracted to science is because it is reason, but I believe reason alone isn't enough. In other words, science alone isn't enough for me to believe and make sense of this world.
Okay, very good. DJ, another question.
Yeah, this one is for Dr. McCallum. You say that God limits our thinking. It's up there. Do you not agree that scientific inquiry to the complete exclusion of a creator, so that inquiry is only allowed under a naturalistic perspective, is limiting? You may need to read that again.
I think I've got it. Yeah. I think the question is saying, is not science simply another limiting system? I think that's the sort of sense of the question, right? So first, I don't say God is limiting. I don't believe in God. This reminds me of a great, there's a wonderful play by Samuel Beckett where these two characters sitting in trash cans on a stage. And after a while they decide, they're arguing about the existence of God. And then, they eventually say, look, I tell you what, let's try an experiment. Let's just be silent for a minute. And if God exists, he'll give us a sign. So they sit there, they're silent for a minute. And then at the end of the minute, nothing's happened. And one of them says, he doesn't exist, the bastard. And so there's... I shouldn't have told that story, should I? What I was trying to get at the paradox of me talking about something I don't believe exists. So what I do think is that religion limits free thinking. And so that's the answer to your first part of the question, is that I don't say that. But I also don't say the other thing that's being imputed to me in that second sentence. And I thought I made that clear in my talk. So just to be clear, I agree, science is not enough. I have lots of ways of finding meaning in life that are not scientific. I just want to be able to pursue those ways, let my thoughts run freely over reason, over art, over love, and over science, and over crusty French bread with butter and Vegemite on it, without the limitation of religion. And let me actually take that a little step further. I don't really care. I mean, if tomorrow I experienced the experience that Satyam was talking about that would convince me that God existed, then that's fine. It's fine with me. I simply have not in my life, in my search for meaning all life, found the need for that concept, found the need to go beyond free thinking.
Okay. I think we're back over on this side, trying to keep track of this. Very good.
I actually just have a simple question for Dr. Devadoss.
Could you give us your name and major, please?
My name is Abby McCallum, and my major...
She must be a plant.
And my major is MCB and EEB. And I'm just curious to know where your belief system came from, if you were born with it or if you came to it over the course of your life.
That's a great question. I saw your hand up for like about 30 minutes, so I'm glad that you got the chance to have the mic.
I promise it wasn't supposed to be a controversial question.
That's a great question. I grew up in South India. My mom was a Christian in South India. My dad was a religious person. Clearly, he was, I'd say, God-fearing. I'm not sure if you'd say that Jesus is the way or anything like this, but he would say that there is a God. So that was certainly in my background. When I came to grad school, I was living in an apartment. My faith was important to me, but when I went to grad school, I was living in an apartment. My first time away from home, I lived at home in college. I was kind of young. I went to grad school. I was, and overlooking the apartment, right behind sort of where my little dining table was set in this small apartment in Baltimore, was a trash dumpster. And I would see this man come there almost every day around noon to looking for food. And I would sit there with my plate of rice or whatever I was eating at that time, there was intense pain for me to start wrestling with big questions. So I think I grew up in a certain box and I understood those things, but it wasn't until that time that I really said, am I really buying this? Is this for real? Are there other fates that I should worry about? Is there even a God? What is this happening to this person? So I kind of took a journey at that time. And it started, I'd say, in grad school, but the foundation was already laid by my mom. That's definitely true.
Question over here, please.
My name is John. I'm a math major. Hoping at some point I don't suck anymore. Question for you, Dr. Devadoss. Referring back to your previous definition of faith, that there's faith, that there's not a pit out there. I would use more for religion, the faith that is a firm belief in something for which there is no proof. We have proof that there's a floor out there. There is no pit. We've been there. It would take a lot more faith to believe that there is a pit. And I mean, I would say that's the type of faith that's needed more for religion. There is not a lot of proof. I've been a lot of places. I've had a lot of experiences. I have never had any seen or felt any proof of God. How do you combine that type of faith with reason? How are you supposed to believe in something where there is no proof while being reasonable about it?
So I guess part of it could be perspective. Like when I came to, first time in Arizona, I flew in, I came out of the airport, walked outside, and the beauty of the surroundings, I've never been in the middle of a desert like this, and it's gorgeous. And to me, when I look at that perspective, I'm going, this is the creation of God. What else do you need more than this, right? So part of it is the way you look at it, If I look at it that way, I'm seeing God's handiwork, God's creation in all of this thing, and that adds to and supports my faith. So one can look at it and goes, this is absolute chance. Things happened from the Big Bang and whatever physics and chemical phenomena that happened at that time with the atoms. And now we're here randomly. And that also takes a leap of faith to believe that everything here, the emotions that I have, the crusty French bread and that, amazing ice cream that I know in Columbus, Ohio, all of that thing is just random. There's a step of faith to believe that thing. So I would say you are actually choosing that as your benchmark to say you see no evidence in God, whereas I see this as the benchmark to see lots of evidence in God. So.
Okay, DJ.
Are we on? Oh, there we go. This one is for Dr. McCallum again. You mentioned love. What is your definition of love?
Keep it R-rated.
Yeah, I mean, I was... yeah, okay, can't talk about that. Yeah, you know what? I don't think I have a definition of love. Not a mathematical definition, anyway. I guess I assume that most people know what I mean when I'm talking about love. And as I said before, I don't just mean romantic love or sexual love. I mean love of your family. I mean love of your fellow human being. And you alluded to this a little bit earlier with the guy who cuts you off, and you want to give him the finger. And it's like, what steps in the way is Love, no. But a certain sort of feeling that you owe it to the society that you live in, to be civil, that we're all worth living. It's worth us all living together in harmony. I'm not getting a very good answer to this question. That's a great question. Let me get back to you on that. Now, my youngest daughter is a great poet, so she writes lots of good stuff that I think gets at what love is. And probably for your definition, you shouldn't be looking to a mathematician. You should be looking to a poet.
Very good. Okay, on this side again, please.
My name is Jake Holliday. I'm a psychology major. I'm a junior. I got a question for Dr. McCallum. All right. So if the famous British mathematician Roger Penrose, who works closely with Stephen Hawking, calculated the probability of the universe happening by chance as 10 raised to the 10th raised to the 123rd power, which is bigger than the number of atoms supposedly in the known universe. How do you support your beliefs?
Oh, I've always thought that was a bogus calculation. I mean, probability is something that exists when you sample from a probability space, right? So what's the probability space here? There is only one universe that we know of. I just think it's rubbish. I mean, here's another way of looking at it. So people do all these calculations where you say, well, all the constants that are set to govern physical laws are just exactly right for the universe to come into existence. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's why the universe exists. I mean, if they weren't that, it wouldn't come into existence, would it? There's no probability argument here that I've ever been able to make any sense of. I don't know what you think.
No, I mean, so when I read and see issues about the beauty of everything aligning up, I interpret it and I say, this is God's creation. But I would not use probability to go there.
Okay, question over here, please.
This question is for both professors, and I would just want to know, where do pain and suffering come from, and why do they exist?
Pain and suffering.
We're flipping a coin as to who's going to do pain and who's going to do suffering right here. So I think, if you look at it scripturally, you can go back to the creation epic and things like this, but roughly the idea of pain and suffering comes from our choices. That's what Scripture tells us. God has given us free will. If He says, you know what, if you want suffering not to happen in this world, that's fine, I could step in. I could step in and make sure the guy doesn't cut you off. But a lot of times you're the guy cutting people off, right? So then you've lost your choice to do what you want. And if you want that thing not to happen to your family, God could step in and cut things off. But then eventually, nobody's given choices. So us choosing what we want is where pain and suffering, to me, comes from. It's the choices we make.
So it depends what sort of pain and suffering you're talking about. I mean, if you're talking about physical pain, physical suffering, and even a certain amount of mental pain and mental suffering, I think this is a case where science does have an answer. I think you can make a case that it's necessary for animals to feel pain. It's a sort of signal to their brains to flee, and that's sort of something that has been of survival value to them in the course of evolution. I think you can make the same case for mental pain and mental suffering when you think about sort of social evolution, the evolution of human social abilities. I'm not an evolutionary biologist, so I certainly couldn't give you the details. But that to me feels like a question that science can answer. Now, I mean, if you sort of go further and want to talk about psychic pain or sort of, something more transcendental than what I've been talking about, then you're getting into a mystical realm where I'm not sure I even have an answer. I do agree with Satyan that a lot of pain and suffering comes from the choices we make. And you can believe that whether or not you're a Christian or whether or not you believe in God.
Okay, DJ, I think we're gonna take this question down here as our last question, and then I'm going to ask the two presenters to, if they have any summary remarks they would like to make, quick summary remarks, we'll do that, and then I'll ask Sam to come back up to the podium. So let's. This will be our last question here, please.
Yes, my name is Gary Warner, and I'm not a student here, but came from a church group to witness this great forum. It's not really a question that I have, but it is for both of you and actually everybody in the audience. The subject of dualism was brought up before, and I think that the Bible is a good example of true dualism. It's both faith and reason. And if you're looking for, a source of faith, when you read the Bible, it is God's interaction with man. But there are many proofs in the Bible, prophecies, thousands of prophecies that came true. And some of those prophecies were so outlandish, you'd never give them a chance to be fulfilled. So the faith and reason are written in the Bible, and that's our book. That's where we get our faith, and that's where we use our reason in the Bible.
Do you have a question?
What do you think about that?
Do you want me to go first? So when I was talking about being attracted to Scripture because of history, that is one of the reasons. If you want to dig deeper, you can talk about the historical resurrection of Christ, or about prophetic works, or about the fact that King David did exist. Israel was, Babylon existed. They were captured at this time period, and historically it makes sense also. So yeah, I agree.
I don't think I have a lot to say about that. The only thing I'll say is that the Bible isn't the only book about which people believe that it has this property. There are other sacred books where the people who follow those religions have the same beliefs about those different books. And if you look at the way modern society works, and like what people can swallow and what people can believe, it's not hard to view this as a human phenomenon and to find a human explanation for the sort of attachment to a text and the belief in its prophecies. And I might add, the fact that those prophecies are sometimes not true or haven't been made.
Well, I want to thank the audience for that lively Q&A time. And now I'd like to turn to the presenters and ask them each if they have a concluding 1-minute remark that they would like to sum up, either something that's been said or a challenge to students, or how they would like to end this forum. So, Bill, can you go first, please?
Wow. Okay. Challenge to students. I've got some good math problems. Yeah, okay. Well, I generally don't... my challenge to students is to figure stuff out for yourself. But I also would like to, there are some people in this audience who, like me, are atheists, or maybe they call themselves agnostics. So I guess another message I would like to give to both the atheists and the believers in the audience is that atheists, just as much as believers, can love beauty, can believe in right, and can experience wonder. And I've spent most of my life doing that.
Satya?
I thought of this on the plane right here. I just want to tell you a story. It's about Karl Barth. He was, I think, in the 20th century, probably the most famous, arguably the most amazing theologian. And this one time an astronomer came to Karl Barth and he said, Professor Barth, isn't it true that all of religion, just all of theology can be summarized by this phrase, do unto others as you would have them do unto you? I mean, isn't that the point? I mean, why go on and on about these things? Isn't that what all faiths are really trying to say? Isn't that the essence of faith itself? Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Karl Barth was kind of taken aback, and then he thought a little bit, and he goes, I think there's a phrase like that that describes all of astronomy. And the astronomer is like, well, what are you talking? You're talking, there's a phrase that one sentence you can describe the black holes and string theory and supernovas and things we have no clue about yet, and dark matter and dark energy. And Carl, yeah, there is a phrase. And the astronomer goes, what is it? He goes, twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. And my point is that I don't want us to trivialize deep things in life. It is easy to say, yeah, that is what the point of all religion is, but really it isn't. At the end of the day, all religions are actually saying different things, and we're actually saying different things. And one of us is right, one of us is wrong, or maybe both of us are wrong. But there's no way both of us are going to be right. And there's no way all religions are going to be right. So spend this time in college questioning each other, enjoying each other, talking to each other, loving each other, having French bread, having ice cream. And, not at the same time, yeah. Yeah, I agree, you're right. And that's my challenge to you. Just make sure that these are deep things people have thought about over centuries, and don't trivialize it.
Could you please join me in thanking our presenters?
For more information about the Veritas Forum, including additional recordings and a calendar of upcoming events, please visit our website at veritas.org.